Good morning, beloved. Goodness, it's back to be good to be back. What is today? Tuesday? Wednesday? Man, I don't keep track. You know, when I was working by the hour, when I was a tradesman, I always knew the day because I lived for Friday. When I got my job as a career firefighter in Colorado, after doing that for about a year or so, I completely quit keeping track of time. It didn't matter anymore. I worked this crazy Kelly schedule where we would work one on, four on and three off, and they just randomly would appear on the calendar, and I never have been able to keep track of the date since then. Goodness, we had some excitement, some wildland firefighting excitement on the homestead yesterday during the live stream. I was not aware of this, but I got the play-by-play from Mrs. W. So I'll tell you what happened, and then I'll jump in. There's always a lot of questions that I receive personally, and I see some in the chat, how to get started in wildland firefighting. So we can discuss that a little bit as well. So yesterday, during about the middle of the chat, I told you guys that we were out burning yesterday. It's going to be a really hot fire season. I think it's going to be a real bad fire season, judging from what I see from fuel loads. My manservant Jariah actually called in a wildland fire 2 days ago on his way home. He spotted one and they responded to it not too far from here. So things are super, super dry, and I knew they were, but I wasn't quite prepared for it. And we had a perfect example yesterday, and a good reason, another reason why Proho, you should have some fire suppression stuff. So we were burning yesterday morning, burning small piles. We had probably 2 years accumulated of brush and trees and different things that we've just kind of staged in small piles. And so we got a fire started, trying to keep it small, 10 by 10 or so, and feeding it with the excavator. Well, we'd been doing that all day and kind of judging the wind, and no problem. We're quite a ways from the trees, probably a good 70 feet from the trees or so, and any tall grass. Well, it was about 1 o'clock. Jariah had been down with the fire all day. We were always attending it, but he stepped away for a moment to come up and do something for Mrs. W. And Jack had just gotten home. Well, in just a matter of minutes, the wind shifted and completely changed and blew the fire back into some grass and trees. And when Mrs. W said when she looked up and she saw something moving, Jariah was going full speed towards the fire. It was just a little tiny fire. Like I said, 10 by 10, but that wind change and just the dryness of everything, it caught the grass on fire, which ultimately, we were never in any threat of this, but had, 15 minutes can make the difference between controlling something and not controlling something if you're not able to get on it. And the fact that we had a fire skid and Jack ran down there and he started using a shovel and putting out spot fires, it's just astonishing how quickly it will grow and it will get away from you. That's something you really want to take care of, especially if you live in the urban interface, because the person who pays for the damage or the cost of putting out a fire is the person, corporation, state, government, agency, whatever, where the fire starts. So you could be a small landowner with up against the national forest and you burning your leaves and your bushes, and it gets away from you, gets out into the forest. Now they've got to deploy all those resources, and then you are on the hook for that fee. So can you imagine that? It would absolutely bankrupt you. So no harm, no foul. We'll be having a little fire-wise conversation about making sure that everything stays attending it, but don't turn your back on that stuff, man. Don't turn your back on fire, and don't turn your back on the ocean. Goodness. Getting into wildland firefighting. So most of the people that I know, the majority of them, the easiest way to get in, we've talked about this before, is through private company. Now, there are 3 ways that you can go about this: private, state, and federal. There may be some outliers, but that's really the crux of it. When I first started in wildland firefighting, I never saw any contractors. There was no such thing as contractors. It was a completely different world. Now, this would have been like back in 2000 or so. 2001, I think, was the first wildland fire was on. It was everyone on, and I was on some huge fires. Everyone that was there was either a federal employee with the Forest Service, maybe DNR, state, some state guys there, not always, but sometimes. Military was often there, as well as prison crews. prison inmates making up type 2 crews. And sometimes prison inmates will actually do work around the camp, putting things up, cooking, even on state fires and such. So that was what you had. And the other thing that was completely different was that they locked us in the camp. You couldn't go outside. It was absolutely forbidden. Sometimes you would have a fire that was nearby a local town. And I guess the theory or the idea of the Forest Service was, we don't want those guys going out at night, going to the bar, drinking, having problems. This isn't going to happen. We're just going to lock everyone in. So you had to be in at a certain time, and they had a security guard, and they would close the gate, and the entire fire camp of thousands of people were basically locked inside, and you couldn't go anywhere. And no one thought anything of it. It was just the way that it had always been done, and it was the way that it was done. Well, that all changed a few years later when they started bringing in contractors. Now, I think that the government has realized that how inefficient they are. I don't know why they bring contractors in. Maybe it's because it just alleviates them of any responsibility. Maybe it's they know how much waste there is in the government and they can do it for less. I don't know that they're fiscally aware of that sort of thing. Or maybe it is that they just bring them in to do all of the grunt work or the heavy lifting or the dirty work that the other guys don't want to do, i.e. mop up, bringing in all the hose lays in, sitting on structures that have no chance of burning down, all of that silly, busy work that's given to people on these big fires. I don't know. I don't know what the politics are behind it. But a funny thing happened when contractors came in. They started showing up, and it was a little bit different because they had their own trucks. Everything wasn't really standardized. You had your red trucks for the DNR before, and you had your green or white trucks for the Forest Service, and the camouflage, the Hummers would roll up, and the prison crews, and the hot shots, everything was pretty standardized. Now guys are rolling in independent private crews in all sorts of different equipment. Well, they tried to lock them in, just like they did with us. And I was working for a district, a city, I guess a city fire department that was contracting out. So we were contracting, but it was government agencies, small departments. So we were pseudo government anyway. Well, those contractors started making a stink about this closed camp, and they said, you can't lock us in here. If you're going to lock us in here and force us to stay here against our will, then you have to pay us. You have to pay us 24 hours a day for every hour that we're in here. If you're forcing us, if you essentially have kidnapped us, then that's the way it's going to be. And they made such a stink about it that the Forest Service ended up dropping that condition, and it's never been, as far as I know, no fires I've done, it's never been the same since. So I know that after that could quite, because sometimes, after a week or so of the camp food and that whole scene, it's nice to be able to go out and sit down and maybe have a meal. And, one nice thing about, I'll tell you one thing that I think, I'm thinking back, I don't ever remember a time that we went to a restaurant as a group with our, you leave your gear on, you got your yellow shirts on. It's obviously your wildland firefighters when we pop into town. I don't ever remember paying for a meal. It was always, every single fire I was ever on, people would pay for your meal. Thank you for what you're doing, because you're coming there to help their communities, and they're pretty grateful. When they get to a point where they're no longer able to deal with the situation themselves, then they have to call someone else in, and that's when we would come in. So it was very nice. It was a very rewarding career in many ways. It's difficult, but I did enjoy that. Sometimes, I remember one fire in particular up in Washington State, we would all come back as a strike team, and the whole town would line up. Hundreds of people would line up, and they did this every single evening. They knew what time we quit. They knew that we would be rolling in the convoy back to the camp and would go through their town, and they would all line the streets, both sides, and be clapping and putting up signs, and kids with, it was great. It's really nice to do something where you feel appreciated. So that's kind of the way that it was. Now, when contractors came in, contractors that I have seen, that's going to come in two flavors. You're either going to be on an engine or you're going to be on a hand crew. Now, these are called resources. A hand crew is just like what you think. It's 20 guys or people, could be guys and girls, 20 people with particular skill sets. So you'll have squads in there, you'll have 3 or 4 chainsaw sawyers, you'll have different tools, and what they do is they're able to just to walk along and build fire lines single file. And you can move very quickly with that many people, and you can do a lot of work, and it's pretty impressive to see. So when you're in a type 2 crew, or a type 1 crew even, and let's say you're at the front and you have a shovel or you've got a Pulaski, your tool of choice, whatever that may be, how it works is they'll tell you, we need a fire line from here to here. We need 15 miles of fire line. We need to get it all the way up here to this river or wherever it is that they're an anchor point that they're trying to tie into. And so what you do is the first person, let's say you have a Pulaski. Chunk, you take a chunk, you take a step. You take a swing, you take a step. You take a swing, you take a step. When you're looking at what you're accomplishing at the first, second, or even third guy, it's kind of hopeless. You're like, oh goodness, there's nothing happening here. Maybe I loosened up a little bit of dirt, or I knocked a rock loose, or I did something, but there's no visible sign that I actually accomplished anything. But I took one stroke, and then I took a step and moved on. Well, the guy behind you does the same, and so on, so forth. And by the time you get to the last guy, you've got basically you've got a beautiful little trail, about so wide, a little fire line down to mineral earth where nothing can burn. And it's very flexible, and so tools will rotate. So a good squad leader or will kind of know his guys, or a good hand crew leader will know his guys what he has, and he'll plug them into different situations. You come through a grassy area where things are going pretty good, maybe you put the hose and the Pulaskis out front. You start getting into some thick stuff, some heavies or timber or brush, well then you bring the saws forward, and you might have 3 or 4 sawyers that are working before the crew, clearing brush and all that stuff. So it's a very versatile thing, and it's amazing to watch it work and to snake across the field and how much you can accomplish. I mean, I've seen crews do miles and miles of line a day by just that simple, slow process where you're not working super hard. You have to pace yourself because it's going to be a long day, but you're able to get quite a bit accomplished. So that is basically how your hand crew works. Now the other side of it is going to be your engines. Now I'm talking to guys that maybe want to get into it, because you can usually make a decision. You can either decide to go on an engine or go on a hand crew. Hand crew is significantly more work, more difficult. Not something older guys or guys that are out of shape would want to do. You need to really be in good shape, young, healthy, and physically strong to do that. It's very demanding, very difficult work, especially for the sawyers. Now, if you're not super physically fit, or that doesn't appeal to you, you don't want to work that hard, but you still want to be on a fire, a good option is to be on an engine. Now, your engine, when I say engine, that's primarily going to be a Type 6. What's that? That's about a F450, maybe a 1 ton or ton and a quarter, F450, 550, 350s even, diesel pickup. And that's going to have a 300-gallon water tank, and it's standardized. So when the call for resources goes out, and the fire boss says, I need 100 Type 6s, these Type 6s will come in 2 ways. They'll either come as individuals, and if they're individual, they need to be staffed with either 2 or 3 people. 2 people if it's federal or state, 3 people if it's a contractor. There's a double standard there. I don't know why, but it makes it, maybe just to make it more difficult. I don't know why they do that, but that's the way they do it. 3 people for private, or used to be, and 2 people you could get away with if you were affiliated with an agency of any sort. So when the call goes out for Type 6 engines, they will come from all over the West. Oregon, Washington, California, Idaho, Nevada, all over the place if they're contracted with the Forest Service. And all these guys show up at the same time or within a day or two of the fire. So how do you organize all this, and how do you deal with this resource? Well, the clever thing about it is that all of the Type 6 engines, the trucks, are all standardized. They all have a certain amount of equipment that needs to be on there, and it's the same for everybody. A certain amount of water, a minimum. You can always have more. You can always exceed the standard if you want to, but you can never go below it. So you're going to have so many fire tools of this type, that type, so many feet of hose line, a drip torch fuel, a chainsaw of a significant size. I mean, it's the government, right? They leave no stone unturned. So it's a massive, massive list. You can go download it if you want. I downloaded it when I was putting my engine together just to make sure that I complied and had everything. And when you roll up, you go through a safety inspection. And that inspector will get in there if he doesn't know you. Once I've got in and kind of knew the guys and you get a reputation, you can go in and they're not going to hound you with this. But if you're a new crew, they're going to go through every single box. They're going to check every single appliance. They're going to check your chainsaw. They're going to check, do you have water? Do you have MREs? Do you have extra PPE? Does your pump meet the standard, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And they're going to go through this checklist. And if they give you the okay, then in you go to the fire camp and then you get plugged in to the resources. Now this is done for a very specific reason so that the guy that's in charge of the fire boss, knows what he has. Back in the early days when contractors first started coming in, there wasn't as much standardization. And there were horror stories of guys that were showing up to fires, getting put together in strike teams. That means a group of 5 engines and a tender makes a strike team, going out and they were unable to work together because they were not compatible. One guy had one pipe thread and another guy had another, incompatible tools, incompatible equipment. I heard a story one time of a guy that drug a great big tanker. He converted an old milk truck trailer and he contracted this as a tanker and pulled up there and didn't have any of the fittings that matched up to the Forest Service, so they couldn't even use the water. So that was always a problem, and that they finally ended up sorting out. So everything is standardized and everything is exactly the same, which makes it really nice when you're working with people. Hey, I know he's going to have a gated Y. I know he's going to have at least 300 gallons of water. I know he's going to have a foam system, you know, all that sort of thing. So just to kind of broaden on this and explain what's going on. So the 2 routes are going to be the engine side or the hand crew side. Now, what does an engine do? Well, it's super versatile. The fact that it's 4-wheel drive, it's small, it's pretty well kind of an off-road vehicle. It's going to be able to get into a lot of locations that bigger, heavier engines cannot. So there's very, very flexible. And so the guys that are running the fires really like them because they can plug them into all sorts of different things. What you're going to be doing if you get stuck on an engine, sometimes it's good and sometimes it's terrible. When I was inexperienced, most of the jobs that I was on was structure protection. So the fire is going to be coming in here into this neighborhood. We would go and we'd sit on a house. Sometimes they would have us, in the early days, we would work feverishly. We were back there with chainsaws. We'd be cutting brush. We'd be pulling firewood stacks off the house. We'd be clearing, just a defendable zone around these homes the best we could to protect them. That was really common to do, and we worked pretty hard to do that. Sometimes we would even wrap homes. Not homes. I don't think I ever wrapped a home, but I did wrap with basically like tinfoil, wrap government buildings. Historic lodges, even porta potties, anything that was historic or valuable to the U.S. Forest Service structure, we would wrap those with tinfoil, this heavy-duty stuff, and prep them for the burn that was eventually going to come through. So that's part of something that you do. The other thing that you'll do is patrolling. And patrolling is always kind of fun, and patrolling an area and reporting back. So kind of the eyes and ears for command of what's going on. And I've always enjoyed that as well. Another job we've had is going along for day after day after day, putting out fence posts that have caught on fire, putting out railroad ties, if a railroad track runs there that have been put on fire. So, lots of different things. Some of the better jobs that you'll get involved with, if you get a good reputation and you get some experience, is they'll attach you to a hotshot crew. So you can work and support with those guys, whatever they're doing. And they're usually always doing something that's super fun. So hotshot crews and such are some of the best firefighters there, and they're always fun to work with. And so you could be doing that. You could be doing night ops with engine or type 2 crews or type 1 crew as well, hand crew, where you go out and at nighttime we'll go out for the night shift and do a burnout or a back burn. Actually, light fire, it's one of the most beautiful things you've ever seen to see a fire burning at night. Light the fire at night to burn out a pocket or to burn back into itself or just to kind of manage fire that way. So lots of different options that you can get involved with and you can do. And then the third side of it is the aviation side, which I never really worked with. So if you have experience with as a ground crew, pilot, support people, there's that avenue as well. But they've always kind of operated independent off-site because we never had a landing strip or a helipad typically where we were camped. So they would fly in from a different location. So I never had a whole lot of experience with those guys. So that's kind of the work and kind of the jobs that you have. If you want to get involved with it, the easiest way to do it, if you want just a turnkey type of operation where you don't have to do anything but just show up, would be to go with a private contractor. Just search in your area, wildland firefighting, private contractors, or do a national search and you'll come up with companies like Grayback is one, for example, a big one that I used to work with. You can show up, they'll interview you, and they will red card you. Red card is a certification that you need to fight wildland fire at the basic level. They'll take care of all that stuff, provide your PPE. Basically, it's just like a job, and you're going to go there and you're going to do that. If you want to just get in now and start building experience and start building your, I guess you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Your task sheet, so you can start advancing your career. That's a good way to do it, because it's a hard thing to break into. And sometimes you just need to break into it and get in there and start doing it. And that's going to count on your resume. You know, it's going to count as a fire season, regardless, even, you know, if you're a contractor or not. So you start right there. Once you're involved in it, keep your eyes open, keep your ears open. Make sure you work hard, work on your own reputation, that you are esteemed and respected amongst the group because you go the extra mile. You came to the fire fit, ready to fight, and then once you're in it, then you can start looking to see, you know, what's going on. You're going to meet people, you're going to see what jobs there are to do, and you're going to kind of get a good feel of what's going to appeal to you or what you'd like to do and what directions you can go into. And that's where you're going to start networking. You're going to listen your first year, you know, or so, you hear what's going on, kind of feel it all out, and then you can start talking to people. And the best place to do that is going to be in the chow line. So if you see a guy that's doing something you want to do, maybe he's a dozer operator. He's running fire dozer, which is kind of cool. You know, it's something that always appealed to me. You can kind of go out there, do your own thing, be independent, do some good work, and it's cool being a fire dozer operator, no question about that. There's going to be fire dozers there, and you can go talk to them. You're going to see them because they're coming out of their trucks. You can go talk to them when they're getting ready or cleaning up or just rehabbing at the end of the day, and you're going to be able to make contacts. Talk to them. Hey, I'm really interested in this. I've always, you know, I don't have any experience in running equipment, but I've really wanted to. How did you get into it? Could you give me any advice, etc.? You know where I'm going with that. And then after two fire seasons, the next year, you're going to have contacts. You're going to have understanding of what you want to do. And you can start making some phone calls, and you can kind of start tailoring your career to what you want to do. So the question that started all this was, I forget who it was. Someone in the chat was going in as a contractor, and they were asking about that. You know, what to expect and how you go about it. But that's what I would do. You just don't. There's a lot to learn. The learning curve is steep. It's a culture that you have to kind of fit into that you're not going to know anything about. So just kind of write off that first year. Okay, I'm going to be a contractor this year, and then see what happens. If I like it, maybe you go back again. You know, if you have a good reputation, there's no reason why you can't really be active. If you have a good squad leader to help you fill out your task sheets, check off all those lists, maybe you can apply for the next level. Maybe you could even get a squad the next year. You know, you never know. It's very much like the military in that way, but a little bit looser. You know, you go home at night type of thing. Goodness, we have a couple super chats. We have a super chat from Splitwood Acres. Shout out to you, brother. He writes, why would Proho want to be a wildland firefighter? Work for the government? Should Proho be an entrepreneur? Yeah, we've had this discussion before. Yeah, that's a good question. We'll talk about that. Why would Proho want to work for the federal government? I'm having a hard time. I'm having a hard time coming up with anything. In I guess maybe just the contracting side has always been. If I were going to go back in it, I would go back in the contractor side. I wouldn't go back. I wouldn't work for the federal government. I wouldn't work for the Forest Service. I wouldn't work for the state DNR. I would go in as private. Why wouldn't I? I just can't deal with all of the nonsense. I can't deal with the pronouns. I can't deal with the sensitivity training. I can't deal with the vaccination mandate. I can't deal with incompetence. I can't deal with power tripping. And really, to be honest, let's be honest about it. If you're a white man, you're going to be at a disadvantage, and if you're not a minority. And so, why would anyone want to work in that environment? That's a good point. That's a good point. I guess because I'm not going to tell anyone what to do. I've stated all this before in past live streams as to why I'm not doing it and why I don't like it. And even when asked to come back, I wouldn't do it for those very reasons. However, it's the only way to play the game. It's the only access that you have. You can't do it unless you are fighting fire on your own property, which doesn't happen very often, and you wouldn't want to happen very often. There isn't any way to get into it. It is, the government has a stranglehold on it. So, yeah, I guess the point I'm making is that it would be worth getting in, doing it for a season, trying it out to see if you like it. And there's always the government, or there's always the private angle. If you're a contractor, and I would consider doing this, Mrs. W and I have talked about this before. I could quite very simply, and what I would do is I would set up a small business and I would put it in her name. It would be her business, a female operated and female owned business. And then I would buy a F350, F450 dually, and I would set it up as a Type 6 engine according to the government specs. And once I had everything in place, I would get myself red carded, Mrs. W would get red carded. We'd have to have one more person. It could either be Jack, it could be Jariah, it could be anyone that we wanted. It could be a couple of different people. Get them red carded, and then throw our hat in that ring. Sign up, do the paperwork, and put ourselves in it, so that when they need resources, we could get the call. And that can happen anytime. You have to get your truck ready. You have to have red carded crews, everything ready to go, all of the paperwork done in the system, and that at any time you could get the call to go anywhere for any amount of time. That's as simple. That's the way that it is. As a private contractor with your own engine, that would be the best way to do it. That would essentially be, you would be an entrepreneur. You run your own business. Yes, you're going to have a boss, which is going to be the federal government. They're going to cut the check. They're going to pay you. They're going to tell you what to do, where to go, that sort of thing. But ultimately, you don't have to do anything you don't want to. If you don't feel like you want to comply with a mandate, then you simply go home and leave. If you don't want to, if they're asking you to do something that you deem is too dangerous, you do not have to do it. You can take your engine and you can leave. So I get it. Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that statement. Why would Proho want to go work for the federal government? Well, they wouldn't. They certainly wouldn't. But if it is about, if a guy understands what he's getting into and like, okay, well, I want to do this as a career, I maybe want to have my own engine, well, I don't see any harm of going in there and doing it, providing they don't make you do something you don't want to do. Go in there and do it for a couple years, get the experience, build the resume, and then get yourself in a position where you could do your own thing. But I don't disagree. I'm really, it puts me in kind of a tough spot here because I loved the whole I loved everything about it. It was such a wonderful experience. I think I have so many great memories and worked with such good people, and we did such good work. It's hard to turn my back on it. It really is. Just the smell, I'll tell you, just the smell of the smoke, just around here in the springtime when you hear it, it just brings back so many memories, and getting the fire skid out and all the tools, and it just really gets in your blood. It gets in the bone. But you're right. Brarely Mason, you're right. We have a super chat from Mr. Split Wood Acres. Shout out to you, brother. Splitwood Acres writes, love your content and love the word. You've had me questioning clean food. What's your opinion on Mark 7:14 through 19, where Jesus says all food is clean? Mr. Overton, would you pull that up and drop that into my show notes for me? Mark 7:14 through 19. Let's read that and talk about that. I want to see it so we can get it in proper context, and we'll comment on that. What he's talking about, what Splitwood Acres is, he's saying that he's being convicted of clean and unclean food. Now, this is a topic that really splits Christendom. There's probably a lot. The majority of people don't fall on the side that I fall on, but that understanding is starting to dawn on a lot of people. You know, diet and what you eat has never really, well, in Christian circles, to be honest with you, apart from like Seventh-day Adventists, which are very much into vegetarianism and diet, and they believe it's important that you take care of your temple, that you give yourself the best food as possible, that a healthy body produces a healthy mind, and a healthy mind is less likely, and a healthy body is less likely being prone to mood swings, being rash. To be a healthy body, healthy mind is more even-keeled. It's easier to walk the Christian walk. You know, I don't know if I've ever heard it put exactly like that, but that's, I mean, to boil it all down, I mean, that is essentially what they're talking about. Studies were done, I believe this was in, must have maybe the 70s, I'm guessing or so. Adventist people live, Seventh-day Adventists live on average, I think it's 7 or 8, 9 years longer than the rest of the population. And so the government did a study on this as to why. You know, why is it that they live so much longer? Is it diet or what is it? Well, it could be many things. You know, I was involved in an Adventist church for many years and still have many contacts and friends there, and I'm very grateful for that church because of the good foundation of the Bible that I learned from it. Seventh-day Adventists are known as people of the book. And they know their Bible. There isn't, you can't go in and bamboozle an Adventist Bible study. They're going to know their Bible. The kids, the ladies, the men, everyone's going to know, and it's a very good discussion. I actually, when Mrs. W and I were attending Adventist church, we enjoyed the Sabbath school morning studies way more than the sermons. That's the way God's people, I think the best way to learn the way God's people should meet is together like that, have a topic and discuss it. To be able to sit down, not have a man up sermonizing, not have a prepared sermon that's written down that he's reading off of a sheet or something he rolls back around, you know, every 18 months or so, but something that is genuine and authentic. How it was done in the Adventist church was really nice. You would show up maybe an hour before the service. This was not compulsory. It was if you wanted to, and they would break out into individual groups. If it was a large church, they might have 3 or 4 or 5 groups. If it was a smaller church, they might have 1. There is a Sabbath school leader. He's not higher or better than anyone else. Usually it was a deacon or you know, someone that was involved in the church, you know, and there would be a topic. And there would be kind of an outline so that you don't just go down all these rabbit holes, that you stay focused. There's something that you're talking about. Maybe it would be, we're going to be discussing the Trinity. What is the Trinity? And then questions, the leader brings questions up or starts the topic, and then it's opened up for open discussion amongst the group. And that's really the best way to learn. And people really get excited, and everyone's involved with it, and people are asking questions and giving answers, and it's a wonderful way to learn. I forgot the point. Anyway, it doesn't matter. We're going to get into here. So Mark 7:14 through 19, and this is the New King James Version. So this is short. I'm going to read it, and then we'll discuss it. So this is speaking of Jesus. When he had called the multitude to himself, he said to them, "Hear me, everyone, and understand. There is nothing that enters a man from outside which can defile him, but the thing which comes out of him, those are the things that defile a man. If anyone has ears to hear, let him hear. When he had entered a house away from the crowd, his disciples asked him concerning the parable. So he said to them, are you thus so without understanding also? Do you not perceive whatever enters? So I'm going to have to go back and read this, and I will read this tonight, but I'm going off of memory here. But I think what was being talked about was there was a point of contention that came up in the church with the Gentile members about eating food sacrificed to idols. Now, one thing that was going on in the days back in Jerusalem and amongst all the cities is you had, Jerusalem was really a crossroads. It was a very international city of the time. You had Hebrews, and you had Greeks, and you had, people from all over, traders. You had people from Africa, you had people from Egypt that would come, and you had the Jewish people. It was their capital right there. Well, the Jewish people had always kept their religion to themselves. It was not open to anyone outside of the Jewish faith. There were some people that would come that were non-Gentiles. We even know or non-Jews. We even know that when the children of Israel were led out of Egypt from 400 years of bondage by Moses, we also know that many of the Egyptians came with them in the camp. That's quite fascinating, isn't it? So here, to paint the picture for you, so Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the patriarchs. Jacob had 12 sons, which became the 12 tribes of Israel. Through various situations, they ended up in Egypt, and the Egyptians turned them into slaves. And they were slaves. The Hebrew people were slaves there for 400 years. They put taskmasters over them. They used them to build facility, all the things that the Egyptian people didn't want to do. Now God rose up Moses and told him, Moses, you are going to go and talk to Pharaoh, and you're going to deliver my people. They've been praying to me. They've been crying out for 400 years. It's your job to go deliver these people. So many of us know the story. He goes to Pharaoh. Pharaoh, let my people go. Pharaoh says, I will not let your people go. Well, then God starts bringing the plagues. Starts bringing these individual plagues upon the Egyptian people. Each time after the plague, Moses goes again. Pharaoh, let my people go. I will not let your people go. And the plagues are getting worse and worse, and they're increasing, right? So the Egyptian people are watching these miracles take place, the plague of the flies and of the frogs and the death of the firstborn and all these terrible things going on. And many of them also saw that these plagues were not falling upon the Hebrew people, but only the Egyptians. So put yourself in that situation. Let's say you're an ancient Egyptian. You're going along fine, and you're upper middle class or what have you, and you have a slave class that does your bidding. Maybe you even have Hebrew slaves in your home. And you're seeing and you're watching these terrible plagues, these supernatural things come upon your city, and it's affecting the Egyptian people, but it's not affecting the Hebrew people. Well, many of them saw that, and they realized that the God of the Hebrews is more powerful than the God of the Egyptians. So that when at that night when all of the Hebrews painted the blood of the lamb on the lintel, when the destroying angel came and took all the firstborn of the Egyptians, and the next day they all fled with everything that they had and all of the loot from the Egyptians, there were many Egyptians that went with them. Can you picture that? I mean, what would you do if you had witnessed those things, if you'd witnessed the power and the magnificence of God and how there were a people that were completely untouched by these plagues? Would you think, maybe I'll go with them? Well, some did. Many did, went with them. And we know that because in the Old Testament, there had to be provisions made for these people that were outsiders. God, they were being treated very poorly. You can imagine that if the oppressor was in your camp, that you had just been liberated and you looked upon those Egyptians that had oppressed you and your people for 400 years, I would imagine that you would want to return the favor, right? Well, this was probably happening, and there were provisions made, rights, so to speak, written out by Moses, that these people have rights. Don't kill them, don't hurt them. They're not inheritance. They don't have the inheritance. They're not Jews. They're not Hebrews, but they have every right to be here. I don't know that God condoned it, but that's just what happened. So that moving forward into the time when Christ came, hundreds of years, thousands of years later, now we have a very distinct separation. The children of Israel keep their religion to themselves. They're not allowed to even eat with Gentiles. They can only eat with one another. They're certainly not allowed in their temple or anything like that. So there's a lot of racism and bigotry in those days. When Christ came, one thing that he changed drastically was he at a certain time he determined, okay, the gospel, God's salvation that has always been offered to the Jewish people is now going to be available to everyone. Whosoever will may come, as the old Christian song used to put it. So this opened up a whole new avenue. And this was something that the early church really struggled with. They had been, we have a funny example. So there was kind of a strained or tenuous relationship between Paul, this is the New Testament, and Peter. These two men were very, very different people. Peter was the apostle. Paul came in after. But Peter was just a regular dude. He was a fisherman, uneducated, very presumptuous, very big personality, quick to speak, slow to think type of guy, but good-natured people and likable all around. Just a normal dude, just a working class dude. Paul, on the other hand, was an intellectual, had the best education, Ivy League equivalent, had the family line, the lineage, he had the pedigree. He was an elite in all senses of the word. Well, these two men were forced to work together somewhat in the spreading or the building of the new church. And there's an example that when the first time the message came to the early church that the gospel is now open to anyone that is not Jewish, to anyone, whoever will come, was through a vision that was given to Peter. Peter was up on the rooftop of a building, and the vision came to him. We've talked about this before. God gave him a vision, and in this vision, a giant sheet that was held by all four corners was let down in front of Peter. And inside of all of this sheet was filled with all manner of unclean animals. These would have been animals that would have been unfit for a Jewish man to eat. It would have been birds of prey, cats, great cats maybe, salamanders, crabs, swine, whatever, all the unclean animals. But that's all that was in there. And this sheet was lowered down, and the audible voice from heaven, the voice of God, said to Peter, "Peter, kill and eat." Well, Peter was mortified, like, "Not so, Lord. I have not from the time I was a child have I ever eaten anything unclean. I've followed all the rules, the law of Moses, the Levitical laws, the laws of what is proper to eat and what is not proper to eat. I've always followed this. All Jews did. No one would have considered not to." And here we have God telling him to break the rules that they had followed for thousands of years, that were handed down from Moses. All of a sudden, just completely go against everything that God has always taught. He's asking Peter, go ahead, it's okay for you now to eat these unclean meats. Does that make any sense? God says, "I'm the same yesterday, today, and forever." No, it doesn't make any sense. And that's the people will use this argument. Look here, look and see. Peter received permission from God to eat all of the unclean food right there. He said it right there. "Peter, kill and eat." Twice. Peter said, no, I'm not going to do that. Can you imagine that? God tells you to do something and you're arguing with him. God lowered it a second time. "Peter, kill and eat." And well, we all know the story. So the vision was taken away. Peter's sitting there contemplating, what in the world was all that about? Knock, 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 knock. Downstairs on the door, someone's at the door. Who's at the door? Cornelius. Who's Cornelius? A Gentile. Cornelius and his family. This was the very first moment. This vision that was given to Peter had nothing to do with food, clean or unclean food, and the right or not the right to eat it. It was showing him that the gospel it's now okay for you, and I want you to tell the story of the gospel to the Gentiles. I set a time aside where it was exclusively for the children of Israel. Now they've all heard it, or enough of them have heard it. They'll either accept it or they won't accept it. Now it goes to the whole world. And the first inkling of this, or the first instruction of this, was through this vision of Peter. Because the way that the Jewish people looked at the Gentiles of those days, and still do today, were as unclean, unfit. They were non-human even, almost the same as someone would look at a dumb animal. And there was a lot of racism. That's just the way that it was. They were the chosen people, and the Gentiles were the lost people, not the chosen people. So this vision about unclean animals was an indication to Peter, now you will go and spread the gospel to the Gentiles. And that's why immediately after that vision was taken away, the knock at the door was who? It was a Gentile. A Gentile and his family that God had instructed through a dream or vision to come and find Peter and to be the very first ones to hear the gospel from the Jewish people. It was the first time that a Jew, Peter, and a Gentile would be together in the same building discussing salvation through Christ. It was quite monumental. That's what that's referring to. So context is always very important. So now the church was faced with a lot of confusion and difficulties. It was pretty simple. What Jesus taught was not completely opposed to what Jewish people had grew up with, had been taught their entire life. So it was within reason that it wasn't a lot of problems. It wasn't a big stretch to go from one to the other. It was just literally just clearing out a lot of the man-made things and getting back to the foundation of what God intended his people to do. Well, now we have Gentiles in the mix who don't know this. They don't know the culture. They don't know the stories. They don't know the Bible. They're coming out of paganism. They're coming out of who knows? Who knows if they're Samaritans? Who knows if they're Greeks? Who knows if they're Egyptians? Who knows if they're Africans? But they're coming in, they're responding to the call, but they don't know anything. And they're making a lot of mistakes. They don't know about these Levitical food rites. They don't know about this and that. They're also trying to intermix their pagan rituals and such with Christianity. Because they figure, you hedge your bets, right? If you're a superstitious person, a primitive man at the time, and you're hearing about this god Baal, which you have little images to, and you believe, because you've been taught from the time you were little, that if you pray to him, this Baal or this idol or the statue, that he will bring rain upon the land. So, you're going to have particular beliefs about this, whatever you're raised with. And now you hear about this Jesus and this God of the Jews, that now he's the true God. It's reasonable to think, well, I'll just hedge my bets and I'll just pray to both of them. I'll keep my statues in here and my Baal, and I'll also go on Sabbath and learn about this. You can see where that could happen. Well, this caused a lot of problems for, as I said, for the early church. And one of the things that was happening back then were there were a lot of temples to idols. The Roman idols, that they basically rebranded from the Greeks. So in the town there, it was customary where if you went to the temple of Ashtoreth, for example, or the goddess of fertility, I forget all of their names, you might go there as a young woman thinking, well, if I go and I give a sacrifice here at the temple, then I'll be able to bear a child, a baby. And what was given was often food or offerings. And there would be a temple priest there, or maybe a priestess that would live off the donations and the food and such. And sometimes there would be so much extra that they would sell this food. So let's say you brought a sacrifice to the temple of Ashtoreth, and you left a bullock or chicken or what have you. This food that was donated to these temples would often be sold on the market, on the open market, because it was just more than they needed. And there was a huge point of contention that came up in the early church. Is it wrong for a believer in God to eat food that's sacrificed to idols? Does that defile a person? If I, as a Christian, knowing the true God, go through the local market and I just unwillingly buy a lamb kebab off of a street vendor that may have come out of one of these pagan temples in the excess, does that defile me? Am I a sinner for this very reason? This question came up. And essentially how it was answered and dealt with is that I think Paul talked about this and essentially said this: look, we know that these idols are false. We know that this is meaningless, that there's only one true God. And for us to ingest or to eat something that has been sacrificed to idols or to a false god, to a Baal, that doesn't compromise us. That doesn't defile us. It's just food. It goes into the stomach. It's consumed. We extract energy from it, and the only real defilement is the waste product that comes out the other end. Someone's shouting outside. I'm going to have to go back and look into this. It's been some time since I've read this passage, but that's how I remember what this is getting at. This is how I remember this, that in the early church, that point of contention between the Jews and the Gentiles upon eating food sacrificed to idols needed to be addressed and spoken of. So I'll speak more on this. I will save this, Mark 7:14 through 19. I'm going to go back and reread this tonight. I'll reread that whole chapter, and I'll have a better explanation from you. But I think that's where we're going with this text. Beloved, the Levitical rules of clean and unclean food, that's a real stumbling block for so many people, especially Americans. It seems that the big problem is with the pork. Anytime I bring this up, I will, when I open my computer, when this is over with, I'll have no less than 5 or 6 emails of people that are sending me scriptures and proof that I don't know what I'm talking about, that we are not under these Levitical laws, etc., etc. They'll give the example of Peter and the sheep. They'll give the same old examples. They have to give the same examples because there's only a couple, and they take them out of context to try to make their point. Is this a salvation issue? If you enjoy a pork chop, does that mean that you're condemned? No, of course not. It's not a salvation issue. However, if you come to the knowledge, oh, okay, so God doesn't want me to eat unclean food. Why? Is it just an arbitrary test of obedience? Or is there something to it? Well, what is an unclean animal, and why doesn't God want us to eat those? These unclean animals are scavenger animals. You know how beef has ratings, your grade A and different qualities? There's no ratings for pork. And have you looked into pork, the worms and the parasites and such that are in that meat when you ingest it, when you cook it? It's been given to us, once sin entered the world, I'm going to speculate here, go out on a limb a little bit, but when sin entered the world, death entered the world and decay. That was never in the world before. And these, I don't know how the world changed so rapidly from the perfect Eden to the savage tooth and claw of nature and the law of the jungle. Things had to die. Things did die. Even plants probably didn't die in the kingdom. But now when sin has entered the world, now we have a very different environment. These scavengers are needed. These scavengers are needed to eat up the decay, the carrion birds, the vultures, even the ants and the bugs. If it weren't for these small insects and birds and animals, of all the great number of animals that perish, these things would stack up and it would bring disease and sickness. And so these animals, in the same way with the oceans, everything that falls down, all of the fecal matter and everything that falls down from the various fishes and such and creatures in the ocean falls down to the very bottom. And that builds up, and I don't know all the nuances of it, but what are down there to deal with it? Carp and bottom feeders and crabs and lobsters and crawdads and all that sort of things. These are unclean animals. These are scavenger animals, not healthy for you to eat, not intended for food. And that is a very difficult thing if you come from a culture that has accepted that, especially with bacon and pork in this country. Or you go down in the South where people are really into eating crawfish or lobsters on the coast or different things. You know, that's a hard thing. It's a hard pill to swallow. You're telling me now I can't have these things that I identify with that maybe are really important in my region. You're telling me the New England man can no longer have his clam chowder, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not telling you that. I'm just telling you that God laid these things out, made a division between clean and unclean because it's not good for you. It's not healthy for you. Well, you say, well, I'm not dead yet. Well, maybe you'll live longer if you don't eat these foods. I think there's no question, if we go to the Adventist study, Adventists eat clean food. They live almost 10 years, nearly 10 years longer than you do. Is God telling us something here? So once you become aware of the knowledge of this, and you go in and you look and read and you understand, and then you still make a decision, well, I don't care what God said. I'm going to have my pork chop because I was raised on pork chops and I'm just going to be in a spirit of rebellion and that's what I'm going to eat. Well, then maybe it is a salvation issue for you. And it's not the food, it's just that state of rebellion. I don't care what God said. I don't care about his instructions. I don't care that my Heavenly Father has given me guidelines or a book to make sure that I live a healthy, happy, abundant life as much as possible. I'm going to eat my pork chop because I damn well want to. You know, that's a whole different thing there. That's a spirit of rebellion. A person that goes forward in rebellion is different than a person that has enjoyed his pork chop and his bacon and because he never knew it, because he was in ignorance. So all I'm asking you, I'm not telling you what to do, and I'm not judging you. I'm telling you what I do. I'm telling you what realization that I came to. I grew up with pork bacon and pork chops just the same as you did. But once I became aware of it and went in and studied it for myself, and I didn't quote scripture out of context, then I came to the realization that God does not want us to eat these foods. These are not suitable for Christians. That's the conclusion that I came to. I'm not telling you what conclusion to come to. I'm just telling you need to look into it and find out. If God says something, he typically means it, and there's a purpose for it. It rarely comes with, whenever I have this argument or this discussion with someone, it rarely comes down to any evidence. The evidence is there. If you think pork is healthy, go look into it. Go look at secular sites and studies. And go look at pork under a microscope, just to single this out. I single this out not because it's the great Satan. I single it out because it's the one that people seem to be really hung up on. And if you go in and study and research it and are not convicted, then, you know, that's fine. I'm not judging you. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just want you to understand that as time winds down, prophecy has told us that there's going to be new insights, that we're going to see things and have understanding that we've never had before, and that we may have been in error. I have no question that some of the things that I talk about here, or that I'm dogmatic about, or I hold to, I could be wrong about it. I just pray for the grace and that I will have the ability that when I become aware that I've been going down the wrong path. For me, perfect example, maybe I have been wrong and could possibly have been wrong, be wrong about the importance of keeping the feasts. I think maybe I've been wrong about the importance of celebrating a pagan Christmas ritual. Yeah, it's a hard one to give up. It's going to make me a pariah in my family. It's going to be, you know, it's going to be a difficult thing to do. It's going to be something that will make, you know, you get what I'm saying. My coming to the realization that Christmas is not a Christian holiday is not unlike you coming to the realization that God doesn't want us to eat unclean food, and maybe I'm going to have to make some changes. You know, you're going to have to deal with your family. You're going to have to deal with all sorts of things, all sorts of problems, and it's going to make you stand out. It's going to draw a target on you. But, you know, another thing that I'm looking into and reading, you know, is that are we supposed to be keeping the Hebrew feasts? You know, the unleavened bread, the Passover. People will argue back and forth about this, but I'm telling you, man, there's a whole lot of devout, faithful people, like true believers, that are waking up to this and starting to do this, that are actually starting to keep this and starting to shun the Western holidays that we were raised with. You know, I haven't done that in the past. I'm aware of it. I know of the growing movement. I've had people reach out to me and ask to offer, you know, studies or literature on it. And to be honest with you, I've rejected it just because I'm stubborn, because I don't want to face it. I don't want to deal with it. You know, it's just too weird. It goes against, I don't know what to do. I don't understand the customs. I don't understand the rituals, how to even do it. If it's necessary, you know, all these things I'm struggling with, but God is bringing new information and preparing his people. There's going to be a lot of revelations. There's going to be a lot of things that we understand differently over the coming years. So all I'm saying, beloved, is look into it. Know that this might be a thing, and make up your own mind. Don't just go forward doing something because you've always done it. Mr. JW's Garage, shout out to you. JW writes, nope, spent a decade as a U.S. Marine and ain't no way I'll ever work for our government. You got to be brain dead to perform their duties. Yeah, I agree. I will admit I'm going forward with this wildland stuff on there's a bit of a nostalgia. And my nostalgia also is rooted in the way things were a few years ago. You know, before the lockdowns, before the restrictions, before the woke nightmare, the tidal wave of wokeness that has washed over us. I was not involved during any of this. If I were to go back, step foot into my old position amongst those people, I would probably make the same comment and have the same feeling as JW does. That, yeah, no way, I can't be part of this. This has moved in a direction too far. I can't deal with the political correctness. I can't deal with the woke policies. I can't deal with I just can't deal with it. That's most likely the case. I'm sure it's the case. So forgive me. It's hard to watch these institutions die that you cherished and you were involved with and that you loved so much. Like the Boy Scouts. You know, Boy Scouts are gone now. You have a Jewish woman to thank for that. Mr. Lucky Boy Cash, shout out to you, who writes, what do you think of this CBDC business going on? I don't know. What is CBDC? I don't know what CBDC is. Central Bank Digital Currency. Oh, I see. Well, it's a power grab. It's a power grab. It's just like the smart meters. It's just like there seems to be whoever the spider that sits at the top of the elites. You know, the people that we see, this Klaus character and the usurper Biden and the Mitch McConnell and the neocons and all of these monsters. You think these people are in power? These people are not in power. These people are stooges for the people that are in power. The people that are in power you don't see. And then the real people who are in power they don't see. And then the spider sits on top, whoever that is, the adversary, which is the great Satan. It seems to be that they're very concerned about control. They want to control everything. The smart meters, they want control over. You know, the smart meters that they are putting on your houses, or you may have them on your house already. Do you know that is essentially a surveillance device? Do you know that they can tell everything, every appliance, and they know the signature of it? They can tell, basically can paint a picture of everything that's going on, what rooms you're in. All of that is being recorded, and all that will be accessible through an AI or through a database. So they put that smart meter on your house, and they know everything you have. And if you don't meet the social credit score, or you say the wrong thing on the internet, you know, before they would have to send someone out there to pull the power meter. You know, even if they could do that, now they can just turn it off with a click of a switch. You know, that's about control. Also with currency, you know, if everyone was bartering and trading or exchanging gold or gold-backed currency or silver for goods, you know, that they wouldn't have any control over that. They can't tell me and my neighbor who want to make a transaction, I want to buy a tractor from him, and he wants to buy, they don't have any control over that, where with this, they'll have control over it. So it's just going to be It's another method that will go in place where they can force their will upon you. Oh, you won't take the jab? Okay, well, we'll close your bank account. Oh, you won't do this? Oh, we'll cut power to your house. We'll cut utilities to your house. You will do what we tell you, or you won't participate in the modern economy. We have the scripture from it. You know, we were told that people of the book in the end days, those of us that are Christian soldiers, will not be able to buy or sell, will not be able to participate in the economy. How could that come about? How could they prevent us from participating in the economy? How could they stop me from going down to my grocery store and buying a bag of oranges? Digital currency. You know, if that's the only thing that's accepted, then that's what will happen. When COVID broke out and it first started opening back up and restaurants were trying to stay open and doing takeout and such, we went down to our favorite local pizza parlor, and we often pay with cash. And we tried to pay with cash and they wouldn't accept it. And that happened to us multiple times where they basically just said, no, we're not accepting it. We're only accepting these cards. Well, is that legal? Can they legally do that? Well, not technically, but they did, and they will make it legal. So it's simple. You won't be able to, they'll start with things like international travel. First, you won't be able to get an airplane if you don't have this central currency. Then you won't be able to get a hotel and a rental car because you don't have the thing, and you can't pay for those things with cash, right? So they'll start with that. And then it will be sporting events and then restaurants. You won't be able to, just the COVID, the whole thing, that whole lockdown thing was a dry run. It was a Hudson-based start as to how people will respond and how much can we push, how much before we get pushback to see how far will people go. And all that was kept, all that was kept on file, all those statistics. If we scare people, we say that this thing is dangerous, how many will just voluntarily just do whatever we want to? Well, over half. And then how many won't? And so now they really know who the true enemy is, because really the enemy of the state is, as they see it, in my opinion, is those who would not comply with the mandate, those who would not listen to the instruction of the government. All of those people, if possible, are in a database who have publicly stated it, and they know that they roughly know the number. What is it, 10%, 15%? So that's what they see. Okay, that's who the enemies are. That's who the real problematic people are going to be. And now they can act accordingly when they want to drop it, when they want to drop when the penny finally drops, whatever that may be. So we understood this. We should know this as people of the book, that we're not going to be able to participate in that economy. So what does that mean for us? Well, it means an underground economy, a black market, a bartering system, or just and in addition to that, and a very radically different way of life. You're not traveling internationally anymore. You're not renting cars. You're not eating out at restaurants, and you're not buying your food at grocery stores. Even replacement parts for machinery and equipment. It will even get down to that point where, because you are not doing something, or because you won't accept this, the digital currency or what have you, then you're going to be frozen out. And many will comply. Many will find the inconveniences so great and the burden so great because they haven't made preparations, they haven't thought about this, they don't have the ability to be self-sufficient, to grow their own food, to heat their home with their own resources, that rather than hold the line, they'll buckle. And when they start getting hungry and their family gets hungry, that will happen in droves. So there'll be quite a small remnant left that are unwilling to accept this currency, unwilling to accept this. Now, is this currency the mark of the beast? You know, I don't know. The good book tells us without this mark, you won't be able to buy and sell. You won't be able to participate in the economy. So I don't know. I can't speak to this, but things are moving quickly, rapidly. Look up to this before you just automatically assume that you're going to accept this and get in this as a person of faith. You know, there might be more to it. There might be a spiritual element to this. So I don't know yet. We don't know. God hasn't revealed it to us, but I don't worry about it, because He will. When we need to know, and we need to know what to do and to have the courage of what to do, then He will be there for us. We have a super chat from Breaking the Flaw. Shout out to you, Breaking the Flaw. Breaking the Flaw writes, what are your thoughts on the Free State Project? I don't know what it is. I'm sorry to say I do not know what it is. I'm assuming secession. That would be an interesting thing. Will the federal government allow a state to secede? I mean, it's going to have to come down to that. We are not, as Americans, we are not united. We are divided, and so divided that we'll never be able to come together at a meeting of the minds and find common ground. Do you think pro-ho can find common ground with a radical leftist? Someone that is actively pursuing legislation to lower the age of consent. Someone that is actively pursuing legislation of killing the unborn. Someone who's actively pursuing legislation of children at the age of 7, 8, 9 should have the ability to make a decision whether they should have a surgery that is unchangeable. People that are actively in support of pedophilia or bestiality. These are Americans living amongst us. There's a large segment of people out there, a huge segment of people out there that believe this, that this is their religion. Can we come together with them? Can we meet, have a Coke and a smile over a beer, and can we find common ground that's going to be acceptable for all sides? No, it's impossible. They've crossed the Rubicon, so to speak. They've gone too far. We cannot accept that. There has to be standards and lines in the sand. We cannot violate the law of God. So that, where are we then? Well, these people, even though they're fellow countrymen, I don't know how else anyone could see it, but it seems to me that these people are enemies. They're enemies of God, and they're certainly enemies of us and our belief system. So what else is there to do? How can you live in the midst of an enemy that's trying to destroy you and your families and your way of life? You can't. So the only thing that can happen is a division of peoples. Either someone's got to go, someone's got to leave, and you've got to be around like-minded people. You know, birds of a feather flock together is the old saying. You want to be around your own type, your own sort. You don't want to be around people that are working against you or enemies. So what else can there be but divisions of land? We may find in the future where if you live in a blue state or a red state, that your belief system just will not allow you to it. It might even become antagonistic and dangerous for you to live there. So the Free State Project, I'm going to read here, is an American political migration movement founded in 2001 to recruit at least 20,000 libertarians to move to a single low-population state. New Hampshire was selected in 2003. Of all places, we're going to go to an East Coast state. Are you serious? We're going to move over to the old country. New Hampshire was selected in order to make a state a stronghold for libertarian ideas. Well, I think it's inevitable. It's going to have to happen, or it's going to come down to civil war, and one side will be defeated over the other side. You know, that's an option as well. I would say it's going to come down to resources. Possibly, if we were to choose a garbage state that had very little value to the federal government in natural resources, for example, like, do you think Washington or Oregon would ever be allowed to become a free state with its vast mineral wealth and its vast wealth of marketable timber, the greatest timber in the world? Not on your life. Not on your life. But something that was barren, or, possibly something that no one wants, it's of no value. I don't know. I don't know, man. I mean, I'd like to think that the good guys were going to rise up at the end and make things right, and the adults were going to come into the room, but we have prophecy that says otherwise. We know, as God-fearing people, as people of the book, we know that we have great persecution to look forward to and to face. But God will provide for us what we need. So I don't know, man. I could only speculate. I like the idea. It sounds good. Would that be the utopia you're hoping for? No, it would not. It would be the same problems, same problems would develop. It's never going to happen. I can't see it happening. We have a super chat from Crazy Cajun. Shout out to you, brother. He writes, God put this on my heart today. 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people who are called by my name shall humble themselves and pray. Yeah, that's all God is asking. You know, he's not asking us to do a great work. I think sometimes he thinks that, or I think sometimes we think that we need to do something extraordinary for God, that we need to be like a Billy Graham, or if we have a church, that it needs to be full of people, or we're not doing God's work, or we're failing in some way. But really, you know what the Crazy Cajun just put down sums it up. God wants what? I just want you to humble yourselves and to pray. I will show you what to do. If you would just submit to me, if you would submit your rebellious spirit to me, you would confess your sins, that you would acknowledge that you've been on the wrong path to me, that's all that I want. That's where we start. I will take it from there. Yes, I will partner with you. We will partner with God, but we won't be alone in confusion, wondering, you know, with no roadmap, with no guide. God's just telling us, if you would just humble yourself, recommit yourself to me and pray. That's all I'm asking. I can work with that. But a person, he's not going to force you to do something against your will. If you're rebellious and you're stubborn and you won't listen to reason and you won't listen to the urging of the Holy Spirit, then God says, I have nothing left to do. I'm not going to force you. I can only let you go. And by letting you go, meaning that you will be the one that pays the consequence, the wage of sin. And what is the wage of sin? The wage of sin is death. You have 2 choices. You can either let me pay that through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, my Son, who paid that debt for you. You can claim that as your own, humble yourself, submit yourself to me, and I will give you instruction. And, you know, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. I will change your life. I will help you to get over all of these vices that you've struggled with, this anger, this jealousy, whatever, this hatred, these family problems. I will help you with these things if you would just do this. If you just submit and humble yourself to me, I can work with that. Yeah, I think that's great. Thank you, Cajun. That was very appropriate. 2 Chronicles 7:14. The full verse here. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves. And who is called by his name? Who's he talking about? Are you a Christian? Do you claim to have faith in Jesus Christ? You're called by his name. He's talking about you. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways. That's the key element. And to turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and I will heal their lands. Yeah. How many would it take of Americans to follow this instruction before God would put his hand of protection back on this land? You know, it seems to me, I've thought about this a great deal and I'm speculating about this, but the trouble that we're having now, one thing you keep hearing from people is they're not even trying to hide it anymore. Everything is out in the open. The pedophiles are out in the open. There's a group, was it Mambla? You know, there's actually a name for it, organization of man-boy love organizations. Have you seen firsthand what takes place at a gay pride parade? Have you seen the physical acts? I mean, if you're not aware of these things, you might avoid them, but it's all out in the open. It's no longer shameful to do this thing. It's as if the deviance has always been under the surface. It's always had to operate it in the back rooms and in the shadows. It's always been there through time immemorial, since our Adam and Eve. It's been there. Their children, got involved in this. But it's been kept in secret places. It's not kept in secret places anymore. And what seems to me what's happening, and the reason why we're going through these tribulations and trials, is I feel God's hand of protection may have been lifted off of this country. that you don't want me in your schools, you don't want me in your courts, you don't want me in your churches, or you don't want churches anymore, then fine, I'm not going to force myself upon you. I will remove the protection, my hand of protection that has been upon Christian nations. We're not the first one that God's removed his hand of protection from. I will remove that, and then we'll see what happens. When you will get to experience what true evil is. When the adversary is off the chain and now operating out in the public without repercussions, but actually even state support, we will see true evil in this country. How many people, how many men of faith could come together and repent and pray for this country to receive that protection back? I don't know. Have we turned the corner? Have we went too far? Only God knows. Yeah, interesting. Mr. Tristan Stevens. Stevenson. Shout out to you. Sorry, brother. Tristan writes, I'm quitting my job at Walmart and starting a job as an automotive apprentice at a dealership. Stealership. I've heard dealerships, boy, is my camera not focusing? I've heard dealerships for auto techs can be a mixed bag. I've heard some really good ones, experienced good ones, and I've heard some that are bad. So just be aware of what you're getting into. But I would rather work as a tech than at Walmart. By the end of fall semester, I'll have my auto and diesel degree, no debt, and a good job with room to grow. Yeah, you're going to have a good job too. I know in this area, I know a couple of guys that own small mechanic shops and a couple of bigger ones, and they can't get good people. They were dying for good people. They're paying good money out here too, like really good money, and they just can't get people to stay. There's so much demand for good techs right now. It seems, I'm getting the impression that they're headhunting one another, that other garages or other dealerships are trying to pull guys that already have jobs because they're hurting so bad. I think I was at the Toyota dealership where we bought Mrs. W's car. This would have been last summer. And I was talking to the service manager there. And I think he said they had 12, they typically ran 12 lifts, 12 techs, mechanics, and now they're down to 3. Then they were down to 3. And that, like, we were there for something insignificant, but even then we had to make an appointment that was weeks out. So I think this is a good move, Tristan, for you, a really good move. Get the dealership or whoever it is you're working for, get them to pay for and shoulder the cost of as much of your training as possible. Take every advantage for apprenticeship, take every advantage to go to specialty schools, whether that be transmission, diesel tech, all that. Build and pad your resume where you can be in a position where you can do your own thing if need be. You know, because even, I'll tell you, you know, that would be, let's say that you're a person of the book that in the end times when prophecy is fulfilled and you're no longer able to buy and sell. You're no longer able to participate in the economy as we know it. If you had your own tools, you know, they can't take that knowledge, that know-how away from you. The ability to repair machines and diesel and gas, you know, you're not going to be beholden to any man. There's always going to be that need, and even more so in the future, and you'll be able to just go directly to the source and barter, trade, work for cash, work for barter, or whatever. Great call. Not a lot of future in Walmart, but good future in auto tech and diesel tech, 100%. So good for you. I'm proud of you, Tristan. Good job. Good job. That is exciting. I always enjoyed that. I always enjoyed working on cars. My granddad was a mechanic his whole life. You know, he had 2 jobs. He only had 2 jobs. He got out of the war in 1946. He went to work for a Ford dealership in Oregon City. It was the only Ford dealership there as a mechanic. Always liked working on cars. Worked there for years and years, through the 50s and 60s, I believe, maybe even into the 70s. He always he had 3 weeks of vacation a year, and he would take a year off, 4 weeks. He'd go to Canada, Lake Louise with my grandmother. He would take her up there, and then he would take me and my grandmother deer hunting with the family for 1 week, And then the last 2 weeks were reserved for elk hunting. That was the big trip. That was his big thing. So he had scheduled a year in advance the elk season. Always knew he was a senior guy, and that was the time he took off. He was the model employee, awesome mechanic. He was the perfect guy. No vices, never came in late, never missed a day of work, honest as the day is long. It's Friday morning. The service manager comes to my granddad and says, "Yo, Chet, sorry about this, but you're not going to be able to take off for hunting. We got too much work around here." Granddad didn't say a word, just nodded, went back to work. Worked out the rest of the day, did all of his jobs, and at 5 o'clock, when it was time to go home, he backed his car into his bay and had his buddy help him grab his toolbox, and they put it in the back of the car, and he quit, and he went elk hunting. Went elk hunting, didn't have a job, but went elk hunting nonetheless, because that's what he did. And then he came back and applied at a dealership in Gresham, Oregon, and got the job there and worked there until his retirement. That was his second job. 2 jobs as a mechanic his entire life. But my granddad was not a outspoken, boisterous, tough-talking guy, but he was a man of action. When he said something, he meant it. And he was not a pushover. Was never taken to anger or boasting or bragging, but he was a man of principle. And that was just too far. And he didn't say anything to anyone. He filled it out. He did it according to his obligation at work, and then loaded up his tools at the end of the day. I always thought that was a pure gangster move. I always admired him for that. Thank you, beloved. Sure appreciate you hanging out. Thank you for all the good questions. I'm going to go back and, Mr. Overton, if you would be so kind, if you're still in the chat, if you could leave these up on my show notes here on Signal for me for a little bit. I want to pull those down, and I'm going to go in and study that tonight. We're going to get to the bottom of the scriptures that you guys asked about, and I want to make sure that I'm speaking in context. And it's been too long. I can't speak to it. I'm just getting a little bit. I got to go back and study it. I need to read the whole chapter, what we're talking about, what was taking place in the time, what is it that they're discussing, what was this about being defiled by the meat. I'm going off of memory. As I said, I think it had to do something with the issue of Gentiles, early Christians in the church, having a dispute over eating food that was sacrificed to the idols. Cops are tops. Not in my book. Not in Proho's book, they're not. Thank you, beloved. Keep us in your prayers. May God bless you and your family. Shout out to Overton. Shout out to the middlemen who've helped out. Shout out to you guys who hang out with me and give me your time. I appreciate that. And our members. All right. Keep me in your prayers. I'll see you guys on the next video.